It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Brazil. Here we go! Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and we continue Series 28 on the groups and players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Brazil's players, and in fact it's part 2 of the Players Mediacast. Here we look at the selections. In part 1 we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that, part 1, in the show notes. Part 2 here will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we'll take a quick look at their preliminary squad and their warm-up games. Section 2 is the main part of the media cast. We look over the list we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 3, we summarize surprises in the selection and review injuries. Let's begin then in section 1. We'll take a look at how they put their squad together. So Germany published a squad very early on May 10th, and that was a 23-man final roster. And then it seems after that, CONMEBOL decided to allow 26 players to be brought. So Brazil added 3 players to their squad. So we'll tell you which ones were added as we go. And then after that, they had 1 replacement, a player removed because of injury, and a new one added. So we'll also talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about their warm-up games. They had 2 warm-up games. The first was on June 8th against Mexico, and the second on June 12th against the USA. We're not really interested in the scores there, but more in the lineups. But incidentally, Brazil beat Mexico 3-2 and tied USA 1-1. Both of those played in the USA. And I feel like we didn't learn a lot through those games. We have Alisson Becker as the goalkeeper in both. That does suggest that he is the starting keeper, but otherwise it was 10 different outfield players in each game. But there is the pretty distinct feeling that the game against Mexico was a B team and the game against Brazil was an A team, but we can't be too confident that those are the players, the game against the United States, that those are the players that will start. So it is kind of a slight hint, but not a clear hint, because he may change the lineups there. Also, he used a different formation in each one, his usual 4-3-3. So we saw he used that twice in March. Those are the manager's first games for Brazil. But then in the game against USA, which we're presuming is the A game, it changes to a 4-2-3-1. With a few players playing out of position there. So anyway, we'll let you know as we go through the players, and that does move us on to section 2, the main part where we look at the candidates and see who made it and who didn't. Let's begin with the manager and say that he was selected, Dorival Jr., and over we go to goalkeepers. So Alisson Becker, the likely candidate. So we have 3 likely candidates here. The first one, Alisson Becker, was selected. The second one, Ederson, had been an injury risk. He was selected for the squad, and then he was the player who withdrew and was replaced. So we'll put him in a different highlight color on the graphic here. So Ederson technically selected and withdrew. Our third likely candidate, Bento, was selected for the squad, and the player who replaced Ederson was our second likely candidate. So we had Leo Jardim. He was not selected. Raphael was initially not selected, but then brought in to replace Ederson. And our third possible candidate is Lucas Perry, who was not selected. Okay, so those are our three goalkeepers, Alisson, Bento, and Raphael. And as I said, the warm-up games does give us a strong hint that Alisson is the one to start because he started both warm-up games there. Okay, let's move on to defense. And we had no definite candidates for central defender, but we did have three likely ones. So we have Marquinhos, who was selected for the squad, Gabriel, also selected, and Lucas Beraldo, also selected. Did I say three? Because it's four likely candidates. The last one was Bremer. Bremer was not initially selected for the 23-man final squad, but then when it was changed to 26 players, he was brought back in. So Bremer, or Gleason Bremer, making the squad there. We also had four possible candidates, the first of whom, Eder Militao, was selected for the squad. But none of the others were. Fabricio Bruno, Nino, and Murillo. None of those selected, nor was our possible but unlikely candidate, Roger Ibanez. Let's take a look at the squad. So in the first game, which we consider a B team game, we have Eder Militao playing alongside Bremer. In the second game, it's Marquinhos and Beraldo. So Gabriel, the Arsenal player, not showing up at all there. Perhaps that tells us he's not a starting candidate. We can kind of get a hint that it is Marquinhos and Lucas Beraldo as a starting pair. But as I say, I wouldn't put too much stock into that because it's just one game. Okay, clearly the manager was kind of trying them all out and making a decision as to who it would be. Okay, I see a little problem in my graphics here, so I'm going to just fix that one. And there we go. Let's go over to the left back position. We had no definite or likely candidates here. We had four possible candidates, the first of whom, Wendell, was selected. The second one, Renan Lodi, not selected, and nor were the other two, Carlos Augusto and Ayrton Lucas. None of them selected. However, our possible but unlikely candidate, Guillaume Arana, was selected for the squad. So a bit of a surprise there. And let's look at the warm-up games. We'll see. Well, basically, each of them started. So Guillaume Arana started we'll call it the B team game against Mexico, and Wendell started the game against USA. So again, it looks like Wendell is the starter there, but not fully confident about that. Over to the right back position, we saw that the new manager used Danilo in the two March games, kind of brought him back into the starting position. Danilo is our first candidate. He's at the likely level, and he was selected for the squad. We had two candidates at the possible level. Emerson Royale, he was not selected, but the second one, Jan Couto, was selected. And we had a possible but unlikely candidate in Vanderson, who was not selected for the squad. Over to the warm-up games, and we see that Jan Couto started the first game and Danilo the second. So the hint there that Danilo is the starter and Couto is the backup, which is what we had thought. Okay, on to the midfield, and we look at defensive / central midfielders. We had a likely candidate in Andre, but we knew he had an injury doubt, and it seems like that injury prevented his selection. He was not selected. The first of our possible candidates, Casemiro, was not selected for the squad, and nor was Pablo Maya. He had an injury concern, which may have played a role in that. But no, that's it for defensive midfielders. On to central midfield, and we have a definite candidate in Bruno Guimaraes and a possible candidate in Douglas Luiz, both of those players selected. And here we have the first of two new candidates added to the squad. So we have Ederson as a new candidate. And Ederson initially was not selected for the 23-man squad, but when 26 players were allowed and 3 players were added, Ederson was one of those added, so he became a selection. We didn't meet him in part 1, so let's just introduce him quickly before we move on. Ederson is 25 years old and got his first cap right here in 2024. His first appearance was in the warm-up games. He started one of the 2 remaining games and was on the bench for the other, and then selected to the squad as one of the 3 players added on. Ederson. Okay, that's defensive and central midfielders. Let's look at the warm-up games. So in the first game, we see a 4-3-3 formation, so a 3-man midfield. Douglas Luiz was there in the center of it, with Ederson on the left and Andreas Pereira, who we coded as who is coded as an attacking midfielder, on the left. I think I said on the Ederson was on the right and Andreas Pereira on the left. Again, that looks like the B squad. In the A squad, it was a 2-man midfield with Bruno Guimaraes alongside João Gomez. So again, not strong evidence that it is a team there, but definitely Bruno Guimaraes we considered an 18 player. Lucas Paqueta was also on the field, but we'll get to that soon. Okay, we will, yes, left midfielders is our next category, and we have Lucas Paqueta here. He's coded as an attacking midfielder, which is interesting in light of the warm-up games. Lucas Paqueta was selected for the final squad, and so was João Gomez, as we saw. So both of these players showing up in the warm-up games and on the final squad. Over to the right midfield, and we had a possible candidate in Joelinton. He was not selected for the squad, though. And we've just covered the midfield, so we don't need to look at the warm-up games for that. Let's move on to the attacking midfield players. And for left attackers, we had a definite candidate in Vinicius Jr., and he was selected for the squad. 4 possible candidates. The first one was Gabriel Martinelli, who was selected. So was our second, Savio. However, Galino, the third candidate, was not selected. Pepe was not initially selected, but was one of the third players added when it moved from 23 to 26. So Pepe getting in there. And our possible but unlikely candidate, Paulinho, not selected. Let's look at the warm-up games to see who filled the spots. In the first game, it was Gabriel Martinelli playing as a left forward in a 4-3-3. We had kind of tagged him as the backup player, so that it was to be expected. On the right, we did, against Mexico, against the United States, the second game, we have Rodrigo playing on the left. We did see that Rodrigo moved around quite a bit in the attacking end of the field, but then that leaves a question mark as to where Vinicius Jr. was, and he's on the field playing as a center forward against USA there. Okay, let's move on to the right attacking part of the field. Here we actually have Rodrigo, and he's a definite candidate, and he was selected for the squad. The likely candidate was Rafinha, kind of playing as a backup. Gets quite a bit of game time because, as we saw, Rodrigo moves around, and when he does, Rafinha tends to play on the in this position as a right attacker. He was selected for the squad. And our possible but unlikely candidate, David Neres, still has the injury tag on him. We'll talk about it at the end, but he was unlikely anyway. Okay, over to the warm-up games, and in the first game we see Savinho playing. He was ultimately not selected, Savinho, and we have Rafinha playing as the right attacker on the right side there against the USA. So Rafinha, a good chance of being a starter in the cup. To central attacking we go, and we have Neymar as a candidate. Neymar did not make the squad due to injury, his cruciate ligament tear there. We had a possible candidate in Andreas Pereira, and he was selected. The other possible candidate, Rafael Vega, not selected for the squad. And then in the warm-up games, we do see they use this position, not in the first game, but in the second game, there's a central attacking midfielder, and that is Lucas Paqueta playing. So in the games leading up to this cup, we saw Lucas Paqueta mostly as a left midfielder. In fact, when they used a 4-2-3-1 formation, he wasn't selected. Only when they used the 4-3-3 was he playing as a left midfielder, and under the new manager as a right midfielder. It seems like every manager has Lucas Paqueta on the field for the most part. And here he is as a central attacking midfielder. So we wonder, that particularly I wonder is, I doubt it's what they'll go into the cup with Paqueta as a central attacking midfield and Junior Vinicius as the sole forward. But we'll see. We move on to the forward line now, and we have Richarlison as a likely candidate. He too was an injury doubt, and seems like that injury got the better of him. He is not selected. However, the very young Endrick, 17-year-old forward, we had as a likely candidate, and he was selected. We didn't think he'd be a starter. We'll see if he starts the warm-up games. We had two possible candidates, Gabriel Jesus and João Pedro, neither of those selected. So that's the first tournament Jesus has not been selected for since before the World Cup. He's been selected for the 2018 World Cup and on. That's what I was trying to spit out, but couldn't get out. Possible candidate João Pedro also not selected, but we do have a new candidate here, and that is Evan Nielsen. Evan Nielsen, I will introduce because he wasn't part of the Part 1 squad. So he's 25 years old with one cap since 2024, just got his first cap. He plays for Porto in Portugal. I do think I forgot to mention the name of the club for the other new player that we introduced. That was Ederson. Ederson plays for Sao Paulo in Brazil, whereas Evan Nielsen is with Porto in Portugal, so over in Europe. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Ederson moving to Europe too. So Evan Nielsen got his first appearance in the warm-up game, started one of the games, and on the bench for the other. Those are our candidates. Wow, who would have guessed a Brazilian forward line of two new candidates there? Neymar, Richarlison, Gabriel Jesus, none of them part of the squad. In the warm-up games, Evan Nielsen did start the first game. And as we saw, Vinicius Junior started the second game. So they're not quite ready to use Endrick as a starter. But I do expect he'll come in as a substitute. All right, that is it. Brazil's 26 players. Let's go to section 3, where we kind of review the surprises here. So notable non-selections. Where we have manager Tite manager of Brazil from 2016 to 2022. So this is their first tournament under a new manager. First tournament in a long time. Notable non-selections, we could have several of the injured players here, but we'll deal with them as injuries. And we only had Gabriel Jesus as a possible candidate, so it doesn't really fit into this category. But for many, that will be a notable non-selection because he had been such a familiar figure. So otherwise, no real surprises here in terms of players not selected. Other than the injuries. Surprise inclusions were left back Guillaume Arana, selected over several possible candidates. We had him as a possible but unlikely, but the manager seems to have liked him. So Guillaume Arana selected for the squad. Also a surprise inclusion was goalkeeper Rafael, but not really a surprise because he was brought in as a replacement for goalkeeper Ederson, who we'll look at in the injury section. We have new players. Evan Nielsen, the forward, and the central midfielder Ederson. Those were the two new players added to the squad there. And let's look at injuries. So we had no players actually recovering from the injury that they were tagged with when we did part one. And but we do have several players dropped due to injury. The first one, of course, is Neymar. That's the biggest news. We did know about all of these, though, in part one, so they don't come as a shock upon the team selection. We have Richarlison. I'll just mention the injury. So Neymar out with a cruciate ligament test since October of 2023, not expected back until July 16th. So just not recovering in time enough for this cup. Richarlison, the forward, he's coded as a left winger, but we talked about him as a forward, out with a hamstring injury since mid-May and not expected back until July 16th also, just like Neymar. We have Ederson, who was selected for the squad and then had to be replaced. Apparently his injury just not allowing him to be on the squad, out with a fractured eyebrow for the last game of the club season, and was an unknown return date. So it looks like they tried to make it work, but were unable to. Finally, we have Andre, a likely candidate. All of these are likely candidates except Neymar, who was a definite candidate. Andre is a defensive midfielder. He was out with a knee injury since late April and had an unknown return date, and apparently didn't make the squad due to that injury, presumably. And then we had two players who were injured but were not strong candidates anyway, so we don't know if the injury was the reason for their non-selection. Likely it played a role, or whether they were just simply not selected. Pablo Maya, the defensive midfielder, was out with a muscle injury since May 30th. Not playing the last club match of the season, and he had an unknown return date on him. Anyway, is not part of the squad. The other one was at the possible but unlikely level for us, David Neres. And he was out with a muscle injury since mid-May. Didn't play the last club match for his club of the season, and also had an unknown return date. So perhaps the injury playing a role in that, or perhaps they wouldn't have been selected anyway. All right, that brings us to the end of part two, our look at the selections here. So we hope that knowing the players better, well, for me, knowing the players better definitely makes the game more enjoyable to watch, and we hope that that's true for you too. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.